Hello, everyone. I'm National Master Luke Calhoun. If you're just joining me, I'm a nationally board certified teacher. That's the highest level of U.S. certification you can get as a teacher, and a professionally titled chess player. And I, in this video, am going to explain the dynamics of the French defense. So I'm going to kind of explain this from both sides' point of view, maybe a little biased towards white because people who are on my channel are considering a white repertoire. But certainly not selling black short or anything. I'm going to give you both sides. And I played the French defense as black for years. I earned my National Master title with it. So I really have an understanding of this opening, and I hope to provide elucidation for those curious about it and how to play against it, and possibly with it if you ever want to switch it off from your current opening if it's not the French. Okay, so the goal of the French defense is to play d5 while bolstering it with a pawn. Now, that's important because if they just play d5 right away, their queen comes out early. This is possible. This is called the Scandinavian. But as you can see, white has two pieces out, black has none. So, and white's going to be able to play d4 before black can play e5. And therefore, white is considered, solidly better. Not winning, but solidly better in these types of positions. This is nice if you like simple prep. But positionally, it's got to be a little suspect, right? So instead, the two main moves to defend the pawn before advancing are c6 and e6, and they both have advantages and disadvantages. So we're not covering the Caro-Kann today, but the Caro-Kann is possible. The disadvantage is that it's going to block in the knight, and that when you play d5, oftentimes if white pushes, you're going to want to play c5, so you'll have wasted a tempo. So it's a very slower moving opening to try to, with some advantages, which I will handle in a different video. The point of this video is the French defense. So again, the king pawn way of defending it. So white's main move is to grab the center, and then black can play d5. And I want to start my discussion of the French defense for both sides with the advance, because it's the most principled, and it's the most interesting, I think, in terms of pawn structures and dynamics, in terms of understanding it. So I just want to talk about themes right now, instead of specific moves and variations that you can play within the advance. So you guys can kind of tell what's going on, why French players love the French defense, and why white players are not shirking away from playing against the French defense. So let's look at white's advantages and disadvantages, and then black's advantages and disadvantages. So first of all, white's advantage is that they have more space on the king side. You can kind of see that white has claimed any kind of a lot of space over here. For example, if white wanted to move pieces into the area I've shaded with red, they could easily, for example, this bishop could go through the red rectangle. This knight could go through the red rectangle. This bishop can go through the red rectangle. And this knight, it's not as easy, but they could maybe one day go through the red. That's a harder sell. But a lot of things can go through this. In the meantime, black's piece play on the king side is pretty weak. The bishop is blocked off by this pawn. This knight has trouble getting over because of this pawn. This knight can't develop to its most natural square to guard all these squares. It can go to this kind of awkward h6 square as its best bet. The bishop can kind of look over here, but it can't get the kind of ray that its opposing bishop is getting on those diagonals. So again, just compare this bishop to this bishop. That would be a complete evenness, but of course it'll be eaten. So now we have to compare it to something like that. And you can see the line here favors white. So white should win most kingside battles that are unveiled against the French. The one exception is if black ever pushes f6. But in doing so, they'll have a lot more kingside space. They'll be able to fight white, even in open file. But they will have this really ugly backward pawn. Super ugly. And give white this square to live with their pieces in the future. So it carries some long-term risk if black ever breaks like that. Another advantage for white is that generally they have superior pieces. Now this one is closer than people think. So everyone who's kind of new to the French defense, they just notice the c8 bishop and they say, oh, that's blocked in. I can't easily develop it here. So therefore that's a horrible bishop, and that is just tragic. But they don't see that white has that problem too. They usually have a very simplified analysis of this, because if you look at c1 over here, this bishop is going to have problems. Let me make a few moves and I'll show you. So here, let's just say here. The issue that white has is that if they ever develop this bishop, the pawn falls. And even if that were not the case, the the places this bishop can be are just kind of weak sauce. Like here is, I guess, stare at a pawn, stare at a pawn. You could go here, but then black can attack, and then, I don't know, it's just like kind of chilling on this little closet over here, but it's a bad bishop. Make no mistake, it's a bad bishop. So bad bishop, bad bishop. And you can debate all you want which one's worse. I would say this one is technically worse in the beginning, but easier to trade. Like, there's nothing, there's nothing easier to trade than there's here, and then it points at the enemy bishop. And while this one, I mean, you can ask the other bishop to come out to play, but I don't know how you're going to initiate a trade without cheating a little. So this one is kind of like a more permanent issue. We also have some bad knights on both sides. So this knight is kind of weak, and this knight is kind of weak. And I'll get into this in more detail. So this bishop, in like a position like this, you can just like think about where it's going to go. And it's pretty much going to go here. It can take, like, try this, like, strategy of, like, say, like, I'll play on the board, takes. It can play here. But the issue is that this bishop has nowhere to go here. It's the good bishop because all pawns are on light squares. So you don't want to trade it off. And you don't want to put it here because it will be trapped. Like, if you played knight e7, a3, and you try to keep it, then suddenly it's dying and trapped. And that can happen to that bishop if you're not careful. So the best place for it is here, is on e7. But that's where the knight wants to go because white just took away the f6 square for the knight. And that's a problem. That means that more often than not, this knight can stay on e7 only if it's a temporary stay. So it stays there and then it just comes to here or to here and it has to leave. Another option that's quite popular is putting the knight here and here. You do have to worry about doubled pawns, but typically speaking, this is fine for black if they do that. The issue with perching it here is that white can sometimes play g4 and then h3 and guard it, and then black is like forever doomed. Like, let me just give an example. Like in a position like this, this is definitely not the optimal retreat square, probably here, but just to give you an example, because this can come up in a lot of different types of positions. This knight can't move anywhere. Like, it's just totally stuck. And so white can really squish black. And if this knight was on e7 and you had this move, it would still be a problem because then now you're squished again and white's setting up brutal attacks. Okay, so white has a couple of advantages to just kind of summarize them. They have this bad bishop. They have this bad knight. And in return, white's weaknesses are these two pieces here, and that's kind of how it plays out. Now, white has a space advantage on the king side. So I want to talk about that as the last strength. So if you can imagine a bishop comes here, this will be attacking a vulnerable attack, and because black can't play within this square, as I've indicated before, they're vulnerable to checkmate attacks. A good example of this would be something like, let's just say here, let's just say black just kind of tries to solve their problems that way. And then takes, and then let's just say they trade, and they castle. I think every French player has lost to this checkmating attack at some point, where the mate threats are brutal because you can't bring a knight onto f6 to guard it because that pawn on e5 is still there. And so, play can continue like this, and white almost always has compensation when examining between like check or just check. I mean, at the very least, they have a repetition, and it's usually better than that. Let me see if I can finish this off without a computer just on my head. It would be like here is checkmate. So that's an example of like what can go wrong with black. Of course, black was like very passive there, but it's still a threat in so many variations. That's a threat because bishop here, knight here, and nothing to guard h7 is a brutal combination for black. Okay, so that's why the advanced variation is maybe on the more tactical side. You see a lot of players play it that are looking for imbalances and don't mind this kind of display. I've already talked to you about how I think the minor pieces are somewhat even, but now I'd like to talk about why this kingside attack doesn't make the French dubious. So this is kind of white and black's thinking. Black's big advantage here, a pro for black and a weakness for white, is the piece development. It is one of the few openings you can play for black where it's like you're playing white. So for example, in this position, it is black's turn. So black is the first to develop a minor piece, and then white responds. And that fact that black is the one initiating development means that black has a dynamic advantage. They have speed on their side, and white's going to need to defend. This is unusual. Like if you compare it to e5, it's white first, black second, always. And in the French, it's the opposite. And why? It's because e5 is not a developing move. So white plays this without moving a piece, and that violates a principle of the opening. Even though it gains space, it does not develop a minor piece, and that is why black usually has a ton of compensation. So they can play like c5, c3, and then they can come at white, especially these pawn centers. Speaking of that, let me talk about like how black's creating counterplay against white. So the point is that if you take this pawn becomes super weak. So for example, you can guard it with like here, but black can attack it a lot. Here, attacks it. Here, attacks it. The queen attacks it. The bishop can come back if you don't want the queen to go there and attack it. And finally, black has f6 if they give up. And if you trade on f6, like let's just put it on the board. So let's play knight f3 here. Then black has 2 pawns in the center and white has none, which means this is going to avalanche white eventually. And that creates a whole host of problems. So it's not super easy to know what to do. And a lot of club players will play like knight f3 and you'll take, and you'll get the same problem for white, like here, and then it just gets attacked. Here, attack, and always f6 after you've castled is an option, and black just has a monster position. So this is what first attracted me, is I was around like rated like, I don't know, 1,000, and I picked up the French and people just started collapsing because they weren't used to how to defend that pawn. Some would panic and take. Some would like play this move. This position is super tricky. Like sometimes people would play check, and I could play knight move, and then this would be their good bishop, and they didn't realize it. And there's this tactical trap here, for example, c3, bishop d7, and then they can play knight takes pawn. And the idea is if you take their bishop, they take back, and if you take the knight, they take this way. So there's all kinds of little traps and tricks within the French defense. And finally, in-games tend to be better for black. And I'll explain that here. Like, let's just say that black takes here and takes here. In an in-game, black will come down this file, and white's pieces have a harder time contesting it. These bishops will naturally be able to fight, while this bishop has problems accessing queenside squares. Additionally, this pawn can be attacked, say like a rook got to c4 with a bishop off the board. It can attack this. This can attack it again. This can attack it again. And so this pawn just shakes, and the defense of it makes white passive. Well, black's pawn is already defended by a pawn, and so they don't have any sort of problems there. Also in the in-game, the kingside attack doesn't make as much sense because it's an in-game. You know, you're probably not going to get checkmated. And so you'll see a lot of white players mess up, like after queen b6, they'll play something like queen b3, and then they're just in a worse position. After queen takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, black should have a huge edge in these in-games. And as an in-game player, I love nothing more than trying to win these games. So that's what black has in store for them. They have, if they can do something with their rush in the beginning, then maybe they'll be able to do something like trade queens. The best move for white here is c3, retaining the d4 pawn. And then now black has some setups and white has some setups that I'll really quickly get into. The one setup for black is the knight attacks. So you like go here, and then you like immediately go knight here, and you try to come in here. And the argument that this is better for white, it might look so optically, but given that this weak pawn is going to be on a dark square, or if it trades, this is going to be on a dark square, and given that the b2 pawn will be on a dark square, that's too many vulnerabilities on dark squares to like live and tell the tale of giving away your dark squared bishop. So typically speaking, black will lose one of these pawns, but they'll gain one of these pawns later in the middle game. And so this is considered fine for black. Also fine for white, by the way. There's no reason to take, but if you like playing against doubled pawns, taking is not worse for white at all. This is considered a kind of equalish position. For those who don't like doubled pawns, Queen B6 is like the like main line of main lines. I almost said old main line, but like, it's still the main line. And then white has choices to play this positionally or tactically. So tactically is bishop d3. This sacrifices a pawn. And there's the old way, back in Mikhail Tal's day, functioned like this. Black cannot take here because if they do, then they lose a queen at the end. That's called the Milner-Berry Gambit. But what they can do is play bishop d7 to block the check. And then this is a crossroads for white. Usually the old way of playing was to play castles. And then black would like come here, but be vulnerable to attacks with knight c3. And then things got wild. But it was starting to favor white with, black with computer analysis, finding all these great defensive moves. So white moved on to two other options. They started playing knight bd2. So after takes, bishop d7, knight bd2 became in vogue with the idea of takes here. And the difference here is that this pawn is defended. So white gets a lot of initiative and can even play on the queen side with a kind of like positional approach and say like, I've developed so many pieces and black has only developed one. Black won a pawn, but that pawn was also stopping the bishop from attacking the queen side. So now I have queen side pieces, and now I can fight white on both sides of the board. I love this as white. I recommend it if you're kind of a tactical player, or even if you're a positional player, because you can kind of squeeze black because they still have pretty bad pieces in this. The new way of playing, like this, recommended in a lot of courses, Gowan Jones Coffee House repertoire, among others, is to play it in a way that Carlsen did, which is after bishop d3 takes, you just castle, and the goal is like after takes here, white again gets a really good game, and white's just going to delay taking until they can defend the pawn. And if black ever takes, it's going to fix their bad piece. So like after here, white's two bad pieces in the French advanced are now really good. This knight can come here. I can't do it here and then come back or into the d6 hole. This bishop that used to be super bad now has a great ray. And so you're trading one advantage, a pawn, for all of your weaknesses being solved. And I think in practical play that would work well. And as black, I would recommend taking it. This is what like is tricky for black about playing these main lines, is that there's so many options for white. Another option is to play a3 with the idea of b4, and black can close it up, and this leads to like trench warfare that I think is like a tranquilizer to both sides. It's just like everything like moves really slow. Black has no attack here, but black usually castles queenside, and white has trouble playing here because these two have created a weakness on the b3 square, and you can like navigate into it. And so, but it is just super slow. For those of you who like to maneuver for like years, you want to be 80 years old by the time you're done. And maybe a 90-year-old is watching this and so like, this is great. But I mean, like lots of time passes by the time you're done. This would be a good choice for you. Black can play it in a little more active way too with bishop d7. Just allow it. Oops. And the idea here is that black has this trick of knight a5 with the pin, and can therefore like come in here and play becomes more open and tactical on both sides of the board. This would be recommended for queenside players, but you have to play open and closed positions. A lot of players who don't know it is black can get squeezed to death. Like in the Scholastic circuit, I saw this a lot, where like people would play here and they'd like try to undermine it, which seems natural, but then after here, this bishop was horrendous, this knight was horrendous, and white had pretty much won the game right out of the opening because of this squish. Like this knight is never coming here. If it comes to c8, where is it coming from there? I mean, this bishop is never coming here. Like it can't break anything. It's over. The game is over, and black played natural moves. So this is nonetheless tricky, even though you have to know your stuff as white. Finally, I'll say if you're playing the white pieces, this is considered like a really solid choice. This would be my recommendation for a lot of players who don't want a lot of drama in their life. Black is equalizing, but it's not so easy for black to play this, and they have to know what they're doing. This is the main line. The idea is if you take, then you take, and this gets a little harried. So usually white just plays b3 to play here to defend the pawn, and then black attacks it all, and then white defends it like this. Black gets a check in here, and no matter how white defends it, they're going to be blocking a piece's defense of the d-pawn. So white has to play this super awkward king f1 move, and then usually like bishop here. That way, if g4 kicking the knight can come here. And play is about even. White will, it's not so scary for white. They're going to play g3, king g2. Eventually, their king will come out. They have a little bit of a space advantage. They're very solid, but so is black. And so this is a very like positional treatment of it, where your d4 pawn is very well defended. Finally, let me just like change to like sidelines for black. One option is to play queen b6 early, knight f3, and then bishop d7, bishop b5. This is recommended in like Yuri's French course. It's super positional. It makes a lot of sense. The issues with all these types of lines is that, like, say, like, let me get some moves on the board. Bishop d7, bishop e2, bishop takes, is that black solves one problem but then loses another. So remember, black has the tempo edge in terms of development, but now after something like knight a3, they are down in development. White has 2 minor pieces out to black's 1. And so usually white's okay with this too, because even though they don't have the static advantage before, their attacking chances just amplified, and they can even consider moves like c4, exploding open the center before black is ready. Nonetheless, this is a nice positional approach, and if you don't mind defending and you just don't want any long-term weakness, I really like these variations for black. I believe the right move is queen c6 or queen d7 here. Queen a6 trying to stop them from castling. Looks great, but I think in actual practice, it's not doing so great. And black can also try a variation where they trade the bishops first and then do that. The other related variation to that is like a little more spice, is like playing here, here, and then bishop d7. But the justification here is that if white plays into like their Milner-Berry, black can set this tactical trap. This is mentioned in Simon Williams's French book, but the point is that if they castle, then black plays takes, knight b4, and the bishop is dead. And this is the good bishop. Like, look at all these pawns on dark squares, because if it retreats, then knight here wins a rook. And so there's no retreat for the bishop, and black should have an advantage. And they also cure this knight, because this knight now can come here. There's no problem. They don't have to stand on this precarious f5 square all game. So that would be just winning. So therefore, it's really tricky for white. So a lot of white players have to play a3. And then there's this move, takes, queen b6, attacking the pawn with 2 pieces. And then if white defends it most naturally like this, black can actually sacrifice a knight. They can't take back the queen, because then the bishop is going to be hanging with the point of here. And then when the knight moves, because the knight is attacked, and it's hard if they defend it this way. The b2 pawn's falling. It's really tricky. So when the knight moves, you take here, and things get crazy. So these positions are technically white is better on an engine, but you can tell, like, in practice, black usually wins, because when they castle and play f6, the rook's going to be staring at the bishop, the king. There's all these vulnerable pieces on this diagonal. There's all these scary checks that black has. And so I find that this is very annoying for white. If I was playing the white side, I would recommend maybe just taking and playing b4. This just like messes with their head, even though that other variation is not a bad variation at all for white. You just have to really study it on the computer. This is also super tricky, because you have all these tactical chances. Like after bishop e2, you can go with f6. And then get a position where, like, king c takes, bishop f4, queen c7, bishop f4, and then castle queenside. And these positions are highly erratic with, like, attacks here. So that's maybe why in Krai's repertoire, d4 repertoire, he recommends just taking and playing b4 against a lot of these systems to avoid all that drama. Okay. So what would I just wanted to like explain the advance first, because so many other variations are built around the advance that you should really know it. And you either love those positions for white that I just showed you, or black, or you hate them. It's super subjective. It's really interesting, and it's very unlike a lot of other chess openings. So The other variations are to keep the tension with knight here or knight here. Before getting into that, though, let's talk about resolving the tension this way. I think that generally speaking, this is always pleasant to see as black. Some people think it's a draw. It's not a draw at all because of the differences in the knights. So in the exchange variation, the knights have basically two ways of developing that are harmonious, and it both involve connecting with each other. So one way to do this is knight here, and the other to do it is knight here, and white has the same choice, knight here, or knight here. So what I'll do is I'll show you one side against each other. So this side's going to go this way. This side will go, eventually, we'll say bishop d6 first to like avoid some complications. So bishop d3, knight e7, castle king side, knight c6, maybe knight d2, but like let's just say bishop g5 first. I don't think this is a great move. Bishop g4, knight d2. Well, we have to guard this. So c3, queen d7, knight d2, f6, bishop h4. Okay, so see knight here, knight here, knight here, knight here. So in this case, they are going in opposite directions. So the key to understanding this exchange variation is that when you have this dynamic, both sides can move the pawn next to the backward knight up one. So notice white has been able to move their pawn next to the backward knight up one, and black has been able to move their pawn up to the backward knight part one. And this creates a lot of really interesting dynamics. This is why the French the French exchange is much more dynamic than people give it credit for. An example line would include like rook e1. Sorry, it's black's turn. They could castle queenside, rook e1, and then play a move like knight f5 with queenside pawn storm coming and a rage attack against black. This is the way I didn't even know about this setup for black until I was looking at an Alexander Alekhine. He was, in case you don't know him, he's a world champion, and he was recommending this play when black really needed a win. He was in a situation, a must-win situation. His opponent played the exchange. This is what he did. He castled queenside, and it was crazy. And white, on the other hand, is better suited to play on this side. They have a stronger d4 pawn as a result of this pawn, and so they can begin like queenside pawn storming, while black can begin kingside pawn storming. And the dynamics are really interesting. And alternatively, if white developed that way, then black could just do the opposite. So for example, here, and say here, 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 here. Now black can play like b5, and we get again the other situation. If they both castle, if white castle kingside, black still has a lot of queenside play. Like this is not so easy for white to defend against. This knight can come here, here, here. And I would say that this knight is kind of misplaced compared to its counterpart. The main advantage to putting it here is castling queenside. Because white goes first, I liked playing black a little bit more. So like here, it's like white has to choose. It's this knight or this knight. And so like, and then black can always mix it up by doing something different, like knight c6, or go boring by doing the same. And so that's the control seems a little bit more in black's favor. Now, that said, I think the French exchange is a really good opening for club players. I think it avoids a lot of the drama. A lot of French players psychologically don't like playing against it. And you can play it in a more interesting way, but by after knight f3, knight f6, or bishop d6, say, c4 is what I would recommend. Because if they take, this is still a good line for both sides. Castle kingside, knight c3, knight c6. This is a queen's gambit accepted, technically, and it's really interesting. White has the isolated pawn, but they have quick piece development. They don't have that closed pawn structure style that so many people hate when playing against the French. So if you're used to playing king pawn openings and getting this like wide open game, this is a really good path. It's solid, it's good. It's not like winning, it's equal, but it's interesting enough with this pawn being able to advance and possible attacks against the black king, while at the same time being kind of out of book against the black player, and they usually like close positions, so maybe there's a psychological edge to be made. Black can do the same thing, by the way. So after like knight f3 here, black can play c5 and kind of entertain the same isolated pawn structure. Or on c3, play here and get kind of this imbalance, which is a favorite of Magnus Carlsen when he's looking for a win in the exchange. So that's the exchange. We finally move to the lines that keep the tension. So one line that keeps the tension is knight d2. And this idea is that if they take, then you will get a knight on a strong square. Some players have been okay with this as black. They played like knight d7, knight f6. It's called the Rubinstein variation. And it's okay, but it's like you have to memorize a lot of theory, and it's kind of drawish. And if you're doing that, then why not play the Petrov? Because, like, let me just show you the Petrov in contrast. Like here, 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 here. I just want to point out the pawn structure. This is a French exchange. It's just a French exchange. So if a French exchange is not that scary, so the Petrov has like when I play the Petrov, it was easy for me because I had experience with the French exchange. So I was like, oh, that's a French exchange. But like a lot of people think it's too dry, and so like I don't know how you feel about that. But if your goal is to be dry, then maybe don't play the French, because the whole goal of playing the French is to like create imbalances. And personally, I think that this is just too nice for white. Like even when they mess up, it's equal, and it just gives white a good game. The nice thing is it's easy to remember for black, because if they play the knight here or here, you in both cases you take at the expense of not having much play. So the problem with knight d2, so the idea of knight d2 is to guard this pawn. And I already talked to you earlier about how in the advance you want to play c3. So by not blocking this c pawn, white is hoping to create a pawn chain. So for example, let me waste a tempo for black to just kind of show you how this would work out. In this position, notice white's nice pawn chain. White can actually play knight f3 later. So they can play like here, and say on here, they play here. This would be the ideal white setup. And now both knights are kind of good. d4 is super defended, and they have just awesome play. So there are some arguments that knight f6 can be played. I think it is defensible. It was recommended in Emanuel Berg's GM repertoire series. And he tries to make it work, but there are like forced draw lines, which kind of takes the fun out of everything. And black has a lot of only moves in critical variation, so it's not very fun, this variation. There was like the old school way of playing it was to play b6 and bishop a6. That was known as the Botvinnik try, but it takes a lot of tempos. Once you take, I mean, that's a lot of tempos. And the new modern try is to play like knight f6, and on any attempt to guard this, like here, there's a quick f6 is the principle. So you get a position like this. And black is fine. Black has nice development, but they still have this pawn. If they ever push, it's isolated, and that's super annoying. So that's not the reason why knight d2 has gone kind of out of fashion as the main line. The big problem, and maybe you can just guess this, is that this knight blocks in this bishop. So a problem that already existed became worse. That's fine if they're going like, okay, what white is saying is like, they're like, oh, I'm going to play here and here, and I'm going to maneuver, and all of that is going to be like well and good, and eventually I'll release the bishop. I just need some time. Just give me some time. Or maybe I'll play e5 and f4 and like slowly build up. Just give me time. The issue, though, is that they might not have time. And if black can open up the position, already that might be of service. White didn't lose a tempo with e5 like in the advance, so they're not behind in development. But they're going to need 2 tempos to develop this bishop, and this knight probably will have to move again. And that is why c5 has been such a dominant response, opening up the position. Because if they take, and say you take back this way, I think taking back the queen, not giving the isolated pawn, has become fashionable. But this is like a good example. Notice how effortlessly the black pieces will come out. And notice how awkward looking this knight is. It can't go to here or here. It can develop to b3. I don't know why it would want to go there, but it could go there. And it could go here, but the other knight wants to go there. In the meantime, this bishop is just waiting on it to leave. And so white is just kind of in a weird position with the opening up of the game. This is considered, some players like it for white because after, say, like takes, usually bishop b5 check first, but we'll just take here to just illustrate the point. This pawn will be isolated, and white can kind of try to control the square in front of it with a knight. and they argue that it's a weakness in the endgame. So a lot of positional players that don't mind kind of being on the defensive in the short term, but like that long-term edge, will play into this and just be happy. Of course, it takes black can decline and take back with the queen, then it's kind of reversed. So now it's white who gets the initiative, but black doesn't have any problems. So like knight here, pawn takes, bishop c4, bishop d6 is a main line. Then castle kingside, a little bit of a trap. Black tries to guard the pawn this way. Then knight g5 is going to be terminal because white can play f4, open up the center, and go kill the king. And it basically loses for black. So black usually has to play knight c6, and then we get a position kind of like this. Takes. And then this is the main line. White can also play an in-game if they want for in-game players. And then this is the main line. And it's tricky. Black is a little behind on development, but they have an extra center pawn. Generally, it's considered equal, but black has to memorize a few moves to make sure they live. And they're a complicated play ahead. For example, it's a question of whether they want to put the bishop here. I've seen some Sam Shanklin games where he puts the knight here and then puts the knight here. So there are sidelines for black and white in this setup, and it's considered okay. So white players have also tried to react like this to it. Knight f6 is currently looking okay theoretically for black because this attack is annoying. For example, after like c3, guarding it, black can play takes, and just get great play against this pawn with f6 and knight c6 and a bunch of other moves to like attack it. So things are tricky for white if black opens it up. Now that said, I think knight d2 is a move I would recommend for most of you. It's super easy to play, and if you don't even feel comfortable like taking the advantage, like it really is an advantage to push, you can always just play bishop d3 and be super boring, and c3 and knight f3 and not do anything spectacular. And worst case is you're going to get an equal game because there's not much black can do if you refuse to go into their French setup. So that's psychologically. And also, I'd point out that c5 is the antidote to knight d2. It's why grandmasters don't love knight d2 anymore. But it can be psychologically very difficult for black because these positions, say like takes. A lot of French players love closed positions, and this is open. It feels kind of like a weird Scandinavian, where sure they can't play knight c3, but it's still very different from any French game. It's very open, and so psychologically, a lot of French players will lose in this setup, even though it's equal, because they don't like open games. And so again, another psychological knight d2 is a super practical move for that reason. You basically tell black that if they want to play their move, they're going to have to incur, deadly positional grinding. And if they don't, then they'll have to incur a psychological disadvantage after c5. So that's why I like knight d2, the Tarrasch variation. Finally, we turn to knight c3. This is like the main grandmaster moves. There are other sidelines like bishop d3, but they get super tricky for white after bishop f3 because it's just awkward to move things. So knight c3 is what we'll finally turn to. And this makes sense, right? White wants to push, but they're waiting on a knight to arrive here before they push. So that way they don't have the tempo down feel of the advanced variation. So they're just like, come on, knight. Eventually the knight's coming to f6, right? It's just a matter of time. And unlike the Tarrasch variation, this move does not block in the bishop at all, and it's well suited for any opening. In fact, black can get in major trouble if they open the position. Like, boom, they open the position against this move, takes, and immediately there's a double attack on the d-pawn, and black hasn't even recaptured this. White is winning. Just like that. So black can't open up the position. White has not made any development problems. They're ready. And so one more pawn move will be the death of black. So they have to keep developing. And this notion that they have to keep developing is super annoying because black's most natural development move is knight f6, which would allow an advance to tempo up. So two moves here that are popular, bishop b4 and knight f6. Bishop e7 is another option. The problem with bishop e7 is that white can play e5, which does waste the tempo. But remember, this knight wanted to transition here. So queen g4 to attack the g7 pawn is going to be super annoying. It's going to be so annoying because they can't really complete their development. It's not the game over or anything. It's recommended in like a Uri course, and it's fine. I've played it myself and I have great results, but mainly because my opponent's out of book and they don't know about the quick queen g4 idea. I would recommend this if you're a club player and most of your players aren't booked up to the teeth. After like here, I tried even h5. It's kind of a funny move, just blocking the queen move, even though it's out of book. And there is like a way around it, but it's hard for them to find over the board. I think in Yuri's course, he recommends like c5, queen g4, g5, which is crazy to play h5 later. That's another option. Simplest, though, is probably just to play like g6 and then h5 and just say, oh, yeah, I have a dark-squared weakness. I'm sorry. But let's just play chess over on this side of the board. You can kind of have an advantage, and I'll be a little worse, but we're at least playing the French, and we're at a book, and I just play with you. Play a game with you. So knight f6 is the most natural option. The issue is that you give white what they want. And white can delay this with bishop g5 and invite bishop e7 with a trade of bishops. And that's ostensibly good for white because this is their bad bishop, and that's black's good bishop. But on the other hand, white has more space, and so trades favor black because they're a little more squished, and it kind of activates the queen later in the game. And finally, the issue here is that black has a lot of replies. So, for example, this is the McCutcheon variation. It's fine for white, but super tricky. And also takes here is a super complicated game. After here, black can play it quietly here, or play here with this like spider webby type play, even a6, b5. Morozevich experimented with this setup, and it's super tactical and crazy, and unlike anything else in the French. So the reason why I don't recommend the bishop g5 against knight f6 from the white perspective is that there's just too many lines to play against. You have to memorize this, and you also have to memorize takes. So you have to memorize 3 lines, and it's just too much. It's just too much theory for trying to trade the bishops when e5 is easy to play. So I'd recommend that, and that's why most players, I think, are playing e5, even though bishop g5 is something you have to know as black. And usually the idea is that white can play here because they're not going to be able to put a pawn on c3. They need another pawn to guard this. And then after like c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e3, we get a rich game. White wants to station a piece here, like a knight here, and then play for f5 later with an attack against the king. Black's going to just attack this all game. They might like move up here, and then eventually trade the bishops this way. They might play f6 for breaks, and a really rich game follows. I would recommend knight c3 if you don't mind theory. There is a lot of theory here. Black has like lots of different setups. And I would recommend knight f6 if you're a more positional black player with the French pieces. I think white is quite comfortable here, but the tactics are minimal compared to other lines. So that would be my suggestion. Knight e4, if you're looking for something weird, is a tactical sideline that is also fully playable, if even though it's a little less sound, because obviously you're potentially wrecking your structure. Finally, we can turn to the winnower, which is the most topical games. Nepomniachtchi played this in the candidates tournament, and before that, it was the favorite of Mikhail Botvinnik. Bobby Fischer famously had a losing record against this line. It was like really, really hard. And the idea is like you're gonna try to attack this pawn indirectly. Both moves kind of beckon the pawn to make a decision, and this is just another way of beckoning the pawn to make a decision and to push. And because of that threat, white probably does have to push, and then black is a tempo up. So black gets this huge dynamic edge with just speed, attack. But it has some major downsides, which is when you trade this bishop, which is, presumably you are, like the main line goes here. This pawn has no easy defenders, and black's king side has lost another piece, and they were already weak on the king side. So, like, for example, after knight e7, queen g4, the attack on the pawn is super annoying for black. And essentially, there was a time in which black thought they could castle. That was what was recommended in Emmanuel Berg's book. But like, it's looking really hairy. The win records with castles is not that great. And so the return of the so-called poison pawn variation has ushered in, and we get a position like this where it just gets wild. So usually it goes here. This is attacked. You can't take this back, or an annoying oops, not there. An annoying check occurs on c3. So you have to play like knight e2, and then generally takes, and then you guard this, and then here this is the main line poison pawn. And generally black has these nice like squares for their pieces. They're super active, but white has some pawns, and I would say this is good for white if they're a computer, but if they're not, probably fine for black. The problem is that black has to memorize a lot of lines. So there's like this line, then there's h4, and then there's the a4 line. There's the knight f3 line. There's the queen, the bishop d3 line. All of these are super playable for white, which is an advantage to playing this as white, is they have to like keep guessing. And even before that, there are dangerous sidelines. Like after c5, queen g4, this is a dangerous sideline. Bishop d2 is a dangerous sideline. Bishop b4, a3 is a dangerous sideline. So I wouldn't recommend playing the winnower for people, you know, below 1800, because there's just too many sidelines. Like, and you're just gonna like be caught in some pet variation versus knight f6, much less sidelines. Like, much more calmer waters. But it is super dangerous. It's a great way to play for a win, because it's also hard for white. Like knight g2 is another sideline, by the way, that I would recommend if you want like attacking chess. Alekhine played that when he was playing this, and he was a French player himself. So super tactical. Generally, white gets this, and then with the double pawns, black gets accelerated queenside play. White gets accelerated kingside play, and all runs amok. This is another reason why some people like the just the practical simplicity of 92, because here, and then you just attack it, and it doesn't lead to anything. So hopefully I've kind of gone over the French defense for both sides, and this is my final recap on what I would recommend. I would say if you like calm, positional, no-nonsense chess, then your best bet is either the exchange variation, and maybe with that knight trick, you can kind of catch black off guard, delay the move of a knight, and then like set up the opposite for a little bit more dynamic play, depending on your wishes. Or the Tarrasch, which is like the more superior, I think, way to play positionally against it, but also a little more theory to kind of add on to your repertoire. I think that's the Tarrasch is the 92 one, in case you forgot. I think that if you're more tactical, then either embracing the advanced variation, because then the nice thing here is the theory is much lower than knight c3, would be an option for most. And then bishop d3 if you're more tactical, and if you're more aggressive positionally, playing bishop e2 or a3. And bishop d3 has a lot of variants to choose from. You can sacrifice the pawn in two different ways that I think are good, as I went over. And if you are if you're wanting, like, if you were, 2,700, you're wanting the best of the best against the French, it's knight c3. This invites the craziness of bishop b4, and it is a lot of theory, but it makes sense. It's the most logical of all the moves. Get out your pieces, guard your center, wait on black to play knight f6 before tempoing. And for that reason, it's the main line. And I suspect it will always be the main line, because generally moves that follow opening principles stay the main line. Well, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope that gives you an idea of what to do against the French, and also kind of the ideas and the themes in the undercurrent for it. I'll catch you next time.